All right, everyone, welcome. This is my privilege today to have this panel, and hey, there we go, there we go, Matt. So anyway, we've got a great panel today. I'm excited to have MH, Matt, and Rob with us. And what I will do, let me share my screen here. I'm going to give you a little bit more background on all three of our panelists here in a moment, but let me set this up a little bit. So let's do this, share this here. All right. So we've been through a lot lately, and maybe that's an understatement, but just kind of, again, setting up this panel, as I was thinking about this, over the past couple of years, we have gone through some things that I'm assuming most of us have never gone through. And we all went through the pandemic and all the things related to that at a personal level in our lives, and maybe all this homeschooling and uncertainty in our personal lives, whatever it is. But all of our employees went through it, personal level and at a company level. Our companies went through it. So all these different levels of our lives went through this. Everything just happened so suddenly, right? Culture got impacted very quickly when everyone went home. Tons of uncertainty. Lots of fear, again, not just within us, but our employees, but also within our customers as our companies are interacting with customers. No one really knew what was happening. Through all of this, some of our industries went crazy and thrived, others didn't. Some thought they would and didn't, and vice versa, whatever it was. But through all of this, we do know, especially in our industry, online learning got a lot of attention. And classroom training immediately stopped. And so you saw a lot of quick movement and adoption within our industry of online and digital learning. And then in addition to that, we saw a bunch of, supply shortages. We never thought we'd run out of toilet paper, whatever it was, right? All these crazy things happened. Well, here we are now. There we go. We've come out of this pandemic in various ways, but now we're seeing just really continuation of uncertain times. And we are seeing markets, go down quite a bit. We're hearing things around inflation and price increases. We're, seeing expensive gas, but then it drops 20 cents and suddenly we think it's affordable now. And we're just, we're like, yeah, it's not over $5. So there are crazy things still happening. We're hearing about slowdowns, potential recession. I look at some companies and they seem to be going gangbusters still, and a sign is out there and says, hey, now hiring, and they're still, going crazy. Others are doing layoffs. Is there a war for talent? It seems at times there is, and then others again are pulling backwards and retracting. We have wars. We still are dealing with pandemic. We've got a scary thing that I don't know much about, but monkeypox just sounds terrifying to me. But there's all of this happening, and we're trying to struggle with, do we come back to how it used to be pre-pandemic and work in offices or work from home or a hybrid, or there's all of this stuff going on. Now, in the midst of all this, obviously I've been looking at it, trying to figure out, well, where do we think our industry will land? Where do we think the learning industry will be impacted? Where won't it be impacted? Will it only happen in certain industries? And honestly, I don't know. Maybe none of us really know. However, I thought, well, let's get some smart people in a panel and let's let them share their experiences and talk a little bit about what their thoughts are, what they're seeing in their worlds. And this is how we got to where we are now. So anyway, with that being said, yes, our panel discussion today will be with MH, Matt, and Rob. And you can find all of them on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'd gladly connect with you there as training and L&D experts and all that. Just a little bit here, just quickly. So each one of the panelists comes from an interesting background for us. So MH is the CEO of Stack Moxie. This is a platform that helps users with their marketing and sales, tech stacks to make sure that they're all working together flawlessly, and you're catching all the different disconnects that are in potentially the flow of your lead going from lead all the way through to sale and all that. She is on the panel as a CEO and founder of a tech business. She's been around in different companies around, I think I saw, service, manufacturing, and software in your background, MH. And this is also the first time I'm meeting you. so this is nice. We've emailed each other. But,
nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So she's here from the perspective of running a company right now and being in the tech space, and having an interest in learning and development and the training part of the world. Matt's coming from us from Edelman, so a PR communications company, a rather large one, and as a CLO there at currently. My understanding, dealing with not only internal training type challenges and initiatives, but also dealing with their external customers. So trying to figure out when customers come into Edelman looking for help, he's also trying to help them with all their L&D needs. Comes from from what I saw, a long background being in the PR space, but also then in banking before that. So we're excited to have you, Matt. Thank you. And Matt and Rob scared me a little bit because as of like 1 minute before we were coming on, I didn't see him yet.
Yeah. I like to make an entrance, Andrew,
I know.
and I certainly appreciate the Back in Black walk-on music.
Well, there you go.
That's great.
And Rob. Rob is currently CEO and founder of XLO Global, doing a ton of consulting right now on lots of boards and advisory type positions. In his past, again, coming from large corporations, CLO at McDonald's. I think they've served billions of hamburgers now. I think that's what their sign says. And VP of Yum University with Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. I know I'm missing something. I think Habit Burgers,
KFC.
Yeah. And then lots of leadership positions, at Singular and various financial type companies. Rob was also, I believe, was it the president of ATD or the president of the board?
Yeah, I chaired the board there in 2010, which seems like about 3 lifetimes ago now. So yeah.
So has also experience within our ATD professional organization that a lot of us interact with and things like that. So that is our group of panelists right now. So what we're going to talk about for the next 50 or so minutes is a little bit about how the past 2 years has impacted the L&D industry and maybe your company or the companies that you interact with and work with. What's happening right now and what you see, if you could look into a crystal ball and help us be prepared for what's coming. What are you seeing right now? And then what do you think is going to be happening within our space? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to stop sharing this so we can see our faces a little bit bigger. but anyway, so MH, let's go ahead and start with you. What have you been seeing the last couple of years around training and L&D within your company and the tech space?
Sure. So Stack Moxie is a venture-backed, fast-growing technology startup, and we're creating a category. So for us, learning is central to everything we're doing. Every employee we're hiring couldn't have any background in what we're doing because we're innovating it. It's brand new. So over the past few years, where we were able to bring people together before, it's been really critical that we build really incredible programs and with a small team quickly and efficiently that trains both our people, our prospects, and our customers, because we didn't have the opportunity to do the classroom things we'd planned.
Yeah. Were you in online learning before that as a company, or did it force you into it?
We were nothing. We were a fast growing startup. Yeah. So we were founded just before the pandemic, and have grown to, thousands of users and customers in just that short time. So our plans had been to do in-person cohort-based events regionally, and we had to pivot. It was really challenging. Our investors were really excited about how much faster we could scale using online learning as a result of the successes that we had.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of companies that got forced in online learning, whether they wanted to or not. I met with an oil company years ago, They were a drilling company doing about 4 billion in revenue, which I think sounds really big for me, but I think in their world, you know, that's not a massive company. However, they did zero online learning, and they were bringing in, you know, thousands of people to do various things and flying them all over. And maybe I should reconnect with them. I'm curious what happened the moment they couldn't do that, if they finally embraced it. But Matt, what have you been seeing the past 2 years, and how has that been impacting Edelman?
Sure. You know, it's interesting to hear MH talk about it. You know, it's unprecedented, you know, is how we often refer to it internally. And, you know, Edelman is a global public relations legacy company, but we play in all the marketing and communication space, right? If we just carved out our digital agency, it'd be the largest, you know, our digital area would be the largest digital agency when you think about it. And, you know, going, you know, into the pandemic, it was, you know, from a learning perspective, it was similar to you were talking about. You know, we were very focused on classroom training, for sure, as well as our clients. And, you know, and I appreciate you talking about how we supported our clients. When we had to pivot, it wasn't just the pivot of bringing learning online. It really was a change of that the skills required are different. And being able, and, you know, the need to be able to act with some speed and some scale. And, you know, if you're familiar with the Trust Barometer, which is our key IP, you know, we look at ourselves as the house of trust, and we've been publishing IP around trust in organizations for over 20 years. The belief-driven employee has really sort of upended that. You know, what do people need? What do they want? What do your employees need, and what do they want? And how they get involved, whether it be through activism or that it's forced us to rethink about what's the employee value proposition that we provide our employees, and how do we, and part of that is how we develop them, you know, and then as you had said, how we support our clients, how their employees get supported. So it's really forced us to rethink, how do we get learning to people in the moment of need, do it with some speed and some scale, thinking about the skills that they need. And what I appreciate also, MH, of what you were saying is skills that they didn't know that they needed, or that they weren't needed years ago that they need now, have forced us to really revisit that. And many of our efforts, and can certainly get into the details of some of them, have forced us to really think about, you know, how do we do that? And some, I think we've been successful, and others we're still learning.
Were your customers that you deal with, were most of them open to embracing new ways of doing learning and jumping right onto that boat, or were you getting pushback or resistance?
You know, I think that they were open. I think more of what we've seen, and, you know, maybe Rob can share some of his experience from a consulting perspective, is I think fear was the biggest first start. They didn't know what to do, right? And so, you know, given that, they were looking for answers. So I think that they were more receptive to say, well, how do we navigate this? And I would say the first, you know, 6 to 12 months of the pandemic was really like, sure, maybe there is some waiting, right? So some hesitancy, because they wanted to make sure that they made the right moves. But in others, they didn't really have the time to wait, and we had to pivot. You know, certainly, as you know, if you know about Edelman, one of our areas of expert, or two of our areas of expertise, are health and crisis or change communication. So we spent a lot of time helping with our clients shift, and that was perhaps in all areas of their business. You know, we also have expertise in finance and supply chain and blah, 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 from a consulting perspective. But all of it was rooted in how do you help people with change. And so, you know, one takeaway I would say, you know, if I had a headline for this group, is that you can't think of learning without comms, and you can't think of comms without learning. And that has been sort of our position and our way of thinking about learning, because you got to be able to do it fast, but you also have to be able to make it sticky. And so, you know, I'm answering your question and then adding to it, but I think that they were receptive, but they're receptive to a ways and making sure that it's going to work, because they don't want to do it twice.
Yeah.
Right.
Rob, what was your experience? I mean, you're I believe in a consulting advisory type role.
Yeah.
With various companies.
Yeah, you know, I was at McDonald's when the pandemic started, so I retired at the end of 2020. So I got to experience at least the first 8 months to flatten the curve, I think it was. So I describe it sort of in two phases, and I think Matthew and MH summed it up really well in that, you know, the first couple of months was uncertainty. And I think there was a waiting period going on because, a lot of the messaging was, if we all stay home and do what we're supposed to do, basically it's going to go away, right? It'll stop. So I think a lot of business planning then basically said like, okay, let's put everything on hold till the end of June. And then let's put everything on hold to the end of July. And then I think you get to where Matthew's point is, where there's certain things where you're like, okay, we can't really wait anymore. We have to continue to do business and we have to figure out how to do these things. So I think there was a shift from uncertainty to rethinking, is I guess the best way I would describe it. And I like that word, Matthew used it. I think that is the right word, where people had to pivot pretty significantly. And it was like, I'll give you a simple example at McDonald's Hamburger University, since 1961, it had been an in-person event, right? Thousands, probably about 4,000 or 5,000 people a year go through that experience. Suddenly you stop in April, it's like, okay, we'll pick it up at the end of June. Well, no, we won't. Suddenly you get into this conversation, do you want unskilled restaurant managers from a leadership perspective, or you need to figure out a way to make this thing happen in a completely different way than it's been happening for more than 50, 60 years. So that was a pretty big pivot moment where really rethinking how do you deliver a similar kind of experience in a better way is really what's been going on. And then on the consulting side, I think a lot of the clients I work with are in the same position. Where some of them, what I'm working with now, did the more traditional pivot to mostly classroom to, and some online to virtual. But now they're really sitting there saying, but wait a second, we liked a lot of what we did with virtual because it proved we can do things across distance. But really now we need to rethink, are we in the right direction? Did we overcompensate? Are there better ways that we really need to be thinking about that make us more sort of fireproof for the future in terms of these things where travel may not be a possibility, or from a recessionary perspective, might be too expensive to do. So how do we make sure we've got continuity in the way people can learn and that we can deliver learning going forward? Big challenges.
Yeah, I feel like where we're at now, there seem to be maybe two big things that are on my mind. One is everyone went 100% online and tried some type of experience there. And like you said, Rob, they might be looking at that now and trying to figure out, okay, does that work for us? Or do we need to pull back from maybe not pull back, but add to some type of in-person element to that and come to, a hybrid approach of some kind, right? And so I think they're trying to figure that out. But now we're doing it in the midst of a ton of different types of uncertainty. So what are you all seeing right now? What are people talking about at the moment when it comes to times of uncertainty in an economic uncertainty, and how they're viewing training and learning in the middle of that? So MH, do you have any thoughts there?
I think this is a great bifurcation of the really strategic thinkers in learning and training development, and the people who just kind of cut costs without really understanding what's going to drive their business and scale their business in the future. Especially coming from this Silicon Valley perspective, you see these companies who then immediately back off training, invest in and stop investing in their people, and it becomes an incredibly vicious cycle. So I think we'll see some companies double down and see this as an opportunity to invest in their talent and grow as we come through layoffs in the recession. And then I think we'll also see companies, and we're already seeing it, there's companies who just haven't made the right decisions who are going to just spiral out. And I'm looking for their engineers, if anyone's.
Anyone looking for an engineering job?
Yeah.
Your company's not investing in you. We are investing in great learning and development.
And Matt, what are you hearing from all the clients that you're working with? Because like MH said, I can see some companies cutting their training budgets. Others say they want to double down. Are there companies actually doing that? And how do we make sure that we position ourselves to be one of the groups that they want to double down on?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a great question. I mean, we've had clients across the board, right? Some get nervous and stop everything. We've also had clients that have gone the exact opposite. In full disclosure, I mean, you and I are working on a client together, and they don't stop, right? I mean, they've done more and more with us during this period of time because they realize the opportunity is there, right? To do more training, and they've always made a commitment to it. It's part of their ethos, right? I think when we think about it internally, our own perspective, because I think that often influences how we engage with our clients, is very similar to what MH said, is I think you have to place your bets. I mean, these are my words, not yours, but I think you have to place your bets, right? And you think about where you're going to have the most impact, right? So having a very differentiated talent strategy is important, right? And saying, what are the critical roles in the organization and where you're going to invest those dollars, right? And I've certainly had a philosophy that there is learning for all. There's learning for some and there's learning for few. And you have to think about how you spend the dollars that you have to do it. So it is a little bit of the being, smarter, not working harder kind of philosophy in there, so that you will get the impact, right? We know data is becoming more important. How will you measure the results? So you're seeing, I think, more of that saying, well, how are you going to get to that elusive ROI when it comes to training, right? And how can you make more of that correlation? So I think we're seeing more of that, and that will dictate then where will you spend your dollars. But I think we are seeing, those who are smart, as MH had said, are seeing the real opportunity to seize on it. And we've done it too. We've said, like, maybe I don't focus on this group and I focus on this group because this is where we're going to have much more of that impact.
Rob, what are you seeing with your clients?
Yeah, I think that I'd echo what I'm hearing again, right? The benefit of going third is to try not to be too repetitive. But I do think what's happening now is organizations are pausing for a second, thinking really through to 2023 from a planning perspective, assuming a much more conservative position, right? Asking questions about the investments that they're making in general, right? Across the board in terms of what they're doing as a business. And I think that trickles down into the L&D piece. And I think that what Matthew said is spot on, and what MH saying is spot on. You're going to have some companies that stop completely, and you're going to have some companies that really lean in. But I think the theme around the ones that lean in and the ones in between are really around what's helping drive the business forward. Because even in a recession, all of these companies are adjusting their plans and their priorities and are sitting there saying, well, if this happens, then we have to operate this way. Or if this happens, then we have to emphasize something else, right? So sales function suddenly becomes incredibly important. And so somebody asked a question about how do you justify investment in your salespeople, when you're taking them off the line. I think you got to show that you're going to drive more sales by investing in them from a learning perspective. So I think, from a priorities perspective, it translates into L&D by sitting there saying, here's where our efforts are tied directly to what it is that you're doing or what the company needs to do to pivot through whatever the next period of uncertainty is going to be. So some of that involves sort of scenario planning. If this happens, then we will change this, stop this, pivot on this, take our foot off the gas on something and, step on the gas on something else, kind of scenario planning. And that agility becomes really important. But I also think that, being realistic about it and leading it becomes even more important from a credibility perspective in your organization, so that you're doing it as opposed to having it done to you, I think is important.
Andrew, if I could add to something that Rob said, one of the things that I think is really important, and you mentioned is, like, I worked in financial services. I worked for Deutsche Bank for many years, that had 60,000 employees. The learning budget was like 140 million euros, right? I had a stint in CPG where I had no money and I had to use Moodle, right? That the thing that actually didn't change, and I think even if you look through at that point in time, I was through a recession of learning. The learning never really stopped. But what was always important, and actually we still see this today, and this may go back to an earlier question that you had, it's actually teaching people how to learn is actually the real opportunity. We're seeing more about getting smarter with learning, being more deliberate with learning, getting into components of like reflective learning, right? And we bring this up as like, everybody does postmortems, but how do people do like pre-mortems and mortems, right? And teaching that amongst teams to truly learn on the job. And so I think in our world, maybe that's sort of more the just-in-time approach, right? And what we've seen is obviously the greatest impact with learning is getting the learning in the moment of need, right? As opposed to doing a classroom training and then sort of waiting for the opportunity to actually apply it, right? So we have to get smarter about helping individuals in the moment of need and actually learning in the work, right? Because that's what they're saying, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know if you had brought this up, but perhaps in some of the way, Rob, you had talked about this. We're professional services. If they're with my team training, they're not billing clients, right? And many of our clients are that way too. So we've got to make it really a valuable use of their time to be in the learning. Now, the challenge I also see with that is, a mantra that I have and try to help people understand in our own business: knowledge is articulated and skills are demonstrated, right? And much of e-learning, in my opinion, good, bad, or otherwise, falls into the knowledge base, right? Because of the modality of it. And how do we also then support the skill building online? That's tough, right? And that provides a challenge us to make that really rewarding. Well, if I'm going to fill myself with presentation skills, how am I going to get somebody to give me feedback? And how am I going to re-record and adjust and so on? So the challenge, I think, to providers is how do you bring more and more skill building in a simple way into the flow, into organizations and into the flow of work, right? And it not be cost prohibitive, right? Because there is that threshold of getting in, and certainly with smaller companies, you can do it more with the bigger companies, but smaller companies, it's really hard to get there. And so then the downside is that often what we do is we throw LinkedIn Learning at it or some other, open source or some other, mass market e-learning product, which really doesn't help when you really need to build the skills.
Yeah, and I think I think Matthew brings up a good point about the pre-mortem versus post-mortem piece, right? I think being really clear to what you're trying to accomplish helps you, frankly, avoid the outcome on the other side where somebody's asking you to justify the existence of what you're doing through an ROI, right? And you see that a lot where it's like, show me the ROI on this. What they're really saying is, I don't see the value of this, or I'm not sure of the value of this program. So help me understand that it's actually doing something. Whereas if you're defining success measures and impacts up front, you tend to avoid that conversation. And if you're aligned with specific business initiatives up front, you tend to avoid that conversation as well. That's that pre-mortem thing. I think, Matthew, it's a good word for it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And, I would also say on there, now making even more of a discussion, is when we pivoted and we went to a hybrid learning platform, that was one of the first, and we had a live 3-day event that we did for our leadership, a leadership program, that we moved online in a hybrid way. And we actually went from, 3 days straight to a sprint model, right? So that was one of being more agile to making it hybrid and blended, right? So there were live asynchronous components and synchronous components to it. But the thing that actually, the rubber that hit the road is that we use natural language processing and machine learning behind it to actually demonstrate who was participating more, who was the connector in the threaded discussions, who completed all the activities, and because then I actually had really robust data to actually say, well, let me show you what's happening in the work, right? Really showing what's happening in the learning to then justify that spend. And, but by going that route, I actually reduced costs, because bringing people together in a hotel for 3 days where you feed them and everything else, that went away, but the learning quality went up.
Yeah. Right? My guess is you probably won't go back.
I don't know, because the thing is, people want to be back. That's the thing, is we keep hearing from employee. Well, we hear it. I hear it indifferent, right? Because you brought up, like, we don't. One of the things that we're, I think, challenged by, all of us, is what's happening in the climate, right? And then getting on airplanes and flying and doing a classroom session and so on. But we still get the request for it. I was recently with our team in Japan, and they were desperate for it, right? And they were bringing people back to the office, and it was a great way of bringing people back to the office. So there is that tension, I think, that we as learning providers will struggle with, in there. So again, it has to be a really strong reason to bring that back together. But how do you, we're trying to figure that out. And maybe that is, instead of a global event, we're doing it as a regional, smaller components, or you bring them together online for part of it, then you send them locally for smaller networking components and you bring them back. I mean, we're playing with different models to think about what the future might bring.
I would argue that that should be a decision you're making in the ROI calculations in advance. How much of this is about building relationships? I think cohort-based learning is such an incredible opportunity for people to build relationships in companies or in prospects or customer segments. And so if that's one of your driving factors, then I don't think completely online can be the only option.
So I'm hearing a lot of, there's going to be an impact to learning across various companies. It sounds like, some of the companies you're interacting with are continuing to do what they've always done. And it's, learning's a part of their business, culture or whatever it is, the thread of their business, and they're just doing that. Others may take a different approach and pull back on that. Some may double down and see it as a great opportunity to keep their employees and to upskill them and reskill them and kind of build that asset really. You talked about how to, I guess, better position ourselves as learning professionals. And I don't know who said it, so I'm not going to say, hey, Matt said this or MH, because I'll get it wrong here. But you talked about just defining success up front, trying to align ourselves to the objectives of the business, trying to figure out what's driving the company, and finding those opportunities where we can really shine and showing what our value is to the business, instead of maybe just being order takers, where it's like, oh, you have some new hire employees, great, I can fulfill that training. But it sounds like you're talking about really trying to figure out, how do we help drive the business, therefore showing our value before someone walks in and says, tell me why I should, have a training group. Does that seem accurate? And are you having any good examples of how you're helping companies do that up front? Some actual tactical examples of how they're showing their value and aligning.
I think we're saying, like, bringing together Rob's point about how you can transition from the person you're focusing your sales piece on, and Matthew's point about what is bringing training and development to the flow of the work. I think everyone is starting to see kind of a paradigm shift, and that this is critical to what we're doing. And in the software world, there's a big focus on the concept of product-led growth, and it's delivering that training and those knowledge pieces into our prospects and customers' experiences at every step. There's a really cool company called Speckit. When you think about creating better learning experiences, they're delivering it right where those salespeople live in Salesforce. And I think that is what we're seeing people really value. It's this innovative approach, these really exceptional learning experiences that are delivered at the moment, just in time that they need it. I know I'm not saying anything that Matthew and Rob didn't say before, but I think it's absolutely the thing that everyone agrees is valuable and has to happen. So I don't think it's a reactionary, especially in fast-growing tech-enabled companies.
Yeah, I think that, I was going to say, I think it's a great point. And I think that, that concept around sort of learning in the flow requires a bit of a pivot from sort of being a product-focused learning and development organization to thinking more about how do you enable people to learn in the organization, kind of back to Matthew's point too earlier. How do you unlock the ability for people to learn when they need to learn, as opposed to, in a product package that we typically think about in terms of a course that people, step away and enroll in and complete. And I do think that that's a paradigm that's emerging and that people are beginning to expect. And I'm hearing that more from executive teams that I'm working with in organizations about their L&D organization. It's really, how do they become the strategic enabler as opposed to the, the L&D department kind of piece. And that is, how do you help people learn when they need to learn, as opposed to the more prescriptive ways we might think about it today.
Yeah, and I would agree with Rob. I think one of the other components to that is helping people take accountability for their learning. That's a third part, is that I think, historically, we think that our managers, our leaders, our organization is responsible for our growth. And where we are is we're the enablers for sure. And have to give them the time and the resources to be able to do that. But we also have to help people recognize the importance of continuous learning. Like I always say, like, I can't be in my job if I'm not demonstrating that I'm always learning, right? And saying that to others. To a point that MH made earlier, business strategy drives learning strategy. So if you don't understand the business strategy and you can't talk the language of business, you're already at a disadvantage, right? So you have to know, and I've always joked, no matter what business I'm in, I'll never know financial services as much as blah, blah, blah. I'll never know CPG as much. I'll never know PR and communications as much as our practitioners do, but I have to be dangerous enough to be able to be in the room and have a conversation with them. And I saw something in the chat of like, how do you ensure organizational goals for learning are important and when you don't have a CLO? It doesn't matter if you have a CLO, right? If for those of you who are on the call, that might be an HR person, right? You got to be able to talk the business. And if you're in the business and you want funding for learning, you got to be able to talk the business, and then you also have to be able to talk learning, right? And make that case, right? Because if not, you're not going to get the funding for it. But I think you've got to take those things into account. And then the other thing I would say is, where I think the strong cases as well is what we've recognized in the pandemic, as well as that we're all human beings. We all have needs, and people want to make themselves better. They also want to protect themselves and safety and so on. So there is this like, well, help me help myself in there. And I think if you tap into rethink basic human needs, and make learning for humans. Like, I think that's another thing that we often get really technical, or things can be really boring. And, like, I just think, again, Andrew, not, to plug how wonderful it is to work with you all, but, we're working on something that is so human, right, in the experience, and it's fun, right? And then, people have such little time, and we can't forget that they're human beings. We can't forget that they're consumers. And everything's been Uberized. So how do you do that in a way that they're gonna, makes it easy for them to learn, and it's more of a pull than a push strategy at the end of the day.
Yeah. I love what you said, Matt, around business strategy drives learning strategy. I think it might be good for us to remember that we are in the learning business in our companies because we're trying to help our companies be successful. And it's not just a learning event or something like that, but if we can actually be ingrained in where the business is trying to go and to help them achieve all the, the massive goals that the company has, if we can be seen as one of those drivers in the business, then I think it would be pretty hard for them in a slowdown or any uncertain times to pull back on that. So if they can really see us as part of that group that's helping to put the foot on the pedal and give a little bit more gas to the company. I've been parts of teams in the past where it was almost like learning was a separate entity, that basically new hires would just come through, you'd pound them through a university or whatever it is. You'd roll out leadership training every once in a while. It wasn't very connected with the executive team and saying, okay, what are your pain points? What are you thinking about? What are you scared about? How do you want this business to go forward? Let me help you do that. So it seems like if we can get connected there, then we'll have obviously a bigger impact on the business and be, I think, more, I won't use the word protected in uncertain times, but at least seen as having an actual seat on the bus and the important bus. Another thing that was brought up, responsible for our own growth. I love the concept. And I think I'll speak for myself. The reality is I take no time, it seems like, just on my own to go learn things. Most of my learning does happen just as things happen to me in the company, or as I have different conversations or whatever it is. I'm terrible at planning out time to work on my personal progression and development, right? Family, work, kids, whatever that, it all just kind of gets in there like it should, and life happens. But one thing I hadn't connected before is you've all been talking about learning in the flow, where wouldn't it be amazing if us as learning professionals, we could inject that learning into all the different parts of the employees' just normal life that they're doing in the business, so that all along the way they are learning to be a better employee and upskilling and all of that, but it's just been in their normal flow. And then to be able to turn around and help them turn on that light bulb, and help the company turn on the light bulb that says, I've been helping you all along the way. And you never had to schedule training time. It was just, I'm helping you at the point of need. And I think that would be pretty cool. I think, yeah, you might have to connect the dots and make sure everyone realizes what you did, and show them that plan so you can get the credit for it. But
there's a whole bunch of PowerPoint presentations that follow up that not needing to take your time on training.
Well, and I like what you're saying, Andrew, is it's like, having great service at a restaurant. You always feel like you've had a really satisfied meal, and you've never looked for your waiter, but they've always been there. Right. Yeah. And what I equate it to it, and I talk to my team about it, and certainly that some of the ways that we've worked with our clients, and this is my turn of phrase, but I think it's the same thing that you're saying, is actually we focus on the moments that matter. Right. And you have these moments of where you build, again, we're the house of trust, where you build or you lose trust. Right. So if you're not focusing on pre-employee, how are we engaging with, a learning opportunity is engaging with employees before they join a company, right? Potential employees, to the moment that they join, right? To their, the moment that they become, managers or are accountable for somebody else, right? Or they take on significant responsibility. If you're not looking at those moments to support people through development, because they've never had them before, you have to realize that. So there it is, a innate development opportunity. You're not focusing on that, you're really missing an opportunity. And then, so I think that's number one. The thing for me, the second thing is then thinking about the comms around it. How will you engage them, right? And learning by itself, it's like a tree fall in the forest. If nobody's there, are they actually going to hear it, right? So you've got to have something where there is this two-way conversation, these feedback loops. How is it coming? What are you learning? And then again, that is in the flow, within the flow of work.
Yeah, I think to expand on that, I think when you're looking at speaking to your leadership or looking for budget in corporations, when we were building a big budget for training, when we were rolling out a sales and marketing center of excellence at Microsoft Office, it was, why are we doing this? And then focusing your comms back to that point. So we can deliver it with cost savings, but maybe it's scalability. We want to be able to hire as many salespeople as we need. Maybe it's ROI. We can get people right out of college. They're lower cost by having this incredible training program. Then we can reduce our cost of employment. I think one of the biggest ones that I would make an ROI case on is diversity and inclusion. If you're in a small industry, I worked at a company, as Andrew mentioned, in the manufacturing space, and we had 4% women across the organization, and there were, 3% women in the industry as a whole. If you cared about diversity and inclusion, you have to build a training program for your HR strategy to be able to have that representation of qualified people. So I think it's making your case on the ROI point, and then bringing those communications back, and then also showing how you had less of an impact on the other operations of the company.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all goes back to being clear on what your business outcome is that you're going for, right? Whether that's increasing diversity or whatever outcome you're looking for. If you're clear up front and you can tie that to why that's important to the business, you're probably going to be pretty successful regardless of the climate that's going on around you.
Yeah, and I'd add on Rob's point is, it would be naive to think that things don't cost things, right? And that we can, if we take out the, live, like as I said, we took out the bringing people together, there were still costs associated with learning. You can have really cost-effective learning, but I think at the end of the day is the pivot on conversation is away from cost to value. right? And if you can really demonstrate the value that you're going to create, then I think in many ways, it's a no-brainer and an easy yes, right, for them.
Well, I've always thought of training being very akin to marketing, because I always thought training needs to look amazing and just be phenomenal. But it's also this great touch point that you have with all of your employees to give them a great experience. And it's not only are they learning and all that, but it's showing us that it's one of the ways I believe that the company gets to connect to their employees. And it should be a wonderful experience, and it should show that we care about them. And, unfortunately, early in my career, I've been in the online learning space since '98 or so. And back in the day, it was all about just building cool content, right? Just pushing the technology side, and could we, it was about the visual graphics, interactivity, whatever it was. And I think many times we lost sight of what you said, Rob, and all of you have been saying this, like, why are we doing all of this, right? It's cool to have a VR course, but that shouldn't have been the main focus. The focus should have been, what is the outcome that I'm driving towards? How does that align to the business goals? And then at that point, okay, how do we create something that can be amazing within whatever budget it is, to deliver that experience where employees and customers come out of that and they're like, wow, I learned something. I feel like I had a great experience. I'm more endeared to the company because of this, and I love it here. So that's why we're driving more towards experiences as well, and not just a product, an off-the-shelf course. I mean, sure, maybe it has its place, but employees do want to be they want to be taken care of, right? They want to have that experience.
Yeah, I think part of that, that piece about, here's what we're trying to drive from an outcome, and here's how much we need to spend on it, or whatever it might be. Part of that conversation is also about, here's the best way we believe to do it. So, VR for VR's sake might be cool and fun from a learning and development perspective, but completely irrelevant in terms of the best way to achieve the outcome from a business perspective. Or it might be the best way to achieve the outcome for the business. Yes, and it requires a higher investment level than we would normally make in a course per se, right? But you're turning around, you're talking about why it's the right way to do it. And the opportunities that it presents for the business in terms of belonging, association, productivity, outcomes, whatever it might be. You're talking about why you're choosing that method as being the best way to do it, right? And I think that's back to the conversation about in-person learning as well, right? There's a huge number of sort of outside the classroom benefits that happen, that we don't capture. There's probably more learning, I'd argue, at the risk of alienating us all, that happens outside the classroom than inside the classroom when you run those in-person experiences, right? Because the learning from others that takes place is usually tremendous. But you need to be intentional that that's part of the outcome that you're trying to drive.
I would add, sorry, go ahead, MH.
I was just going to say, to Carmine's point, or her question about soft skills education, I think the soft skill education can also be about the importance of learning and discussion, and how to learn from one another, how to have those conversations that enable that osmotic learning, as it is, that happens outside the classroom. Sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
No, sorry. By the way, sorry about my dog barking. Oh, good.
It's Zoom.
Yeah, it is Zoom. That two other things I would say on that is, system and risk, right? We all know that, at least I believe that we all know, is that the number one reason that people say no is because there's risk, right? And so especially when you start raising the cost, right? So you have to, as you're part of your business case for it is do a risk analysis. One of the things that we do is an FMEA chart, right? We're looking at, the impact of the risk, how potential, what's the likelihood of risk is going to happen. And we address all of the risk items that we've discovered to be able to make a very strong business case. So if I were you, I might be thinking this is a risk, but here's how we might solve that. So I think that's one, is having enough of a risk argument or business case to go along with your business case. The other is, Da Vinci invented the helicopter, but why there was no helicopter when Da Vinci was alive is because the system wasn't ready for it. So what we have to consider is that the system has to be ready for the learning solution. So again, the VR for VR sake is, I couldn't even have that conversation with certain clients. They're not ready for it, right? They know classroom training. So you have to consider whatever the solution that you're providing, it will work in the system that you're trying to put it in. And don't lose sight of that, right?
I just heard you say system equals readiness of client plus technical infrastructure of the world.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so some of that is really, technology for technology's sake is a wrong play, right? But because you can do some really level 1 types of e-learning, right, that are fantastic, right? And then we'll have much more impact than if you got fancy schmancy with it.
Yeah. Well, and I like how you brought up the risk piece. A lot of things we've said, when you have great learning experiences, it can help employee morale, their belonging, their connection to the business, of course, their learning and all that. But there are times when the reason why we are so important to the business is because we can help them avoid risk. And whether it's safety issues, compliance, just legal issues, whatever it might be, that's another, I think, strong position to be in when we can connect ourselves back to, I am protecting the company in these various ways. Mm-hmm. And through all of this, we can make sure that we don't end up in a heap of trouble. Okay, just quickly here for everyone that's listening in, we've got a few more minutes. If you have a question that you've been burning to ask that you haven't put in chat, and Stephanie, if I've missed one, yeah, I can't read and listen to the panelists at the same time. So if I missed something there, please let me know. But if you have any questions, now is your time to put them in there. And so let's see it.
Andrew, I think we do have one in the questions panel from earlier. Several of you mentioned that you had heard an expressed desire for more in-person learning and going back to the office in person. Are you hearing those from leadership, from the more individual contributors in your employee workforce? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I mean, what we're hearing from clients, and I'd even say a little bit of ours, is that leaders want people to be together, right? If you think about it, because collaboration happens that way, great ideas come together, Some employees don't want to come back together. They've grown very accustomed to being able to walk to the refrigerator, play with their dog, get on with life. And so there is that, again, that balance of the tension. And I think hybrid will be there. What we've tried to think about also is that what's the word I'm looking for? The equity and sort of the creating community and belonging, right? When people can't all be together, how do we ensure that they're doing it? So like some of the things that we're trying is making sure that we do, if we say that all employees have to be in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as an example, we actually run training still on the Mondays and Fridays virtual for a lot of learning so that it's equally accessible for all employees. And then when we are deliberate about training and say, hey, we are going to run something on Wednesday, please be in, we're getting in front of that so that we're not creating an imbalance in this hybrid environment. But it would be naive to ignore that there's a tension between employees and leadership about getting back into the office.
Yeah. So last question for everyone here. And Rob, we'll start with you because you're in the middle of my screen. So
sorry.
No, it's fine. You've got hundreds of learning professionals on here right now. What is your, I guess, the last thoughts and comments for them as they're trying to build out various types of learning experiences in the current environment that we're in?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic aside, recessions will come and recessions will go. So having been through, I think, 4 cycles in my career of recessions, the key to sort of surviving in that, and I think the key even during recessive times, is thinking about and tying to business value in terms of what you're doing. right? So are you aligned with, and can you point directly to the things that you're doing that improve the outcomes for the business? And if you can do that, then you probably won't have to worry too much, right? I'll use a simple example. If you're solely focused on onboarding, while onboarding is incredibly important, if your company moves into a recession and stops hiring, you can probably expect that you're not going to be doing much work, right? And that you're somewhat at risk for it. So, so I think it's thinking about how you're positioned in the business, thinking about what you're doing in the total package of L&D and how it drives value in the business, and recognizing that you always have risk areas in your own function, right? Like onboarding is a good example, but you also have other opportunities in the business to pivot then and drive even more value in tougher times. So think about where those are and stay focused on where those are, more than getting distracted by the noise of recession and layoffs and everything else that's swirling around you, that half the time is speculative.
Thank you. MH,
Oh, gosh.
what would you say to hundreds of L&D professionals?
I mean, I just think it's such a critical core piece of every business. I don't want them to feel separate from the business, but to think of themselves as the nexus of the business. I think it's probably a well-known stat in this space that the Deloitte did a study of the top 500 Fortune 500 companies, and the top companies spent 2x on learning and development what the bottom performers did. So I think it's critical to think about investing in delivering training in the flow of work and looking at these really cool new modalities. But as I care about a diverse future, so I think these learning and development people are really the backbone of being able to create diverse futures for their companies, and to really outperform the market as a result of that. So cheers to y'all.
Thank you, Matt. Parting words?
I would say if everything's important, then nothing is. And so get laser focused on what is important and make choice.
Thank you. It sounds like we need to figure out what's really driving our businesses, get laser focused on that, make sure that we're aligned to what leadership cares about and how we're going to drive that value and impact in the business. And then I think we can be in at least our best position as our companies go through rocky times, whatever it might be. So, but thank you. Thank you for spending the last hour with us. And again, all of you that are on ELBX today, please reach out on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with some, again, learning leaders in our space and all that. These are 3 of them. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. They come from great backgrounds and have been through lots of different experiences. MH and Matt and Rob, thank you very much.